Well, we're back into our study of the Epistle of James. We're in chapter number 2. We left off in our last lesson with verses number 9 and 10, and I'll read them again just as a reminder. James writes, "But if you show partiality, you are committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors, for whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in one point, he has become guilty of all." So again, we talked about that. I think we all understand. Certainly there are sins that the punishment for them would be greater, obviously, like murder. Murder is going to have one punishment, while something like stealing would have some other punishment, or bearing false witness. But from God's perspective, they're all His commandments. And if you've broken one, you've broken them all, because He is holy. He has blessed us with the whole. So now James in verse number 11, if you notice, he starts off verse number 11 with 4. So James is going to go into a fuller explanation of what he's just previously stated. "For he who said, 'Do not commit adultery,' also said, 'Do not commit murder.' Now if you do not commit adultery, but do commit murder, you have become a transgressor of the law." Of course, those are two of what are commonly known as the Ten Commandments, but really more appropriately, the word devarim should honestly be translated sayings, or words, the 10 sayings. But the first half of the 10 sayings are directed Godward. The second half of the 10 sayings are how we treat one another. And he mentions, in this verse 11, he mentions two of them, adultery and murder. Now, unfortunately, we are living and have been living in a culture that has accepted adultery as no big deal. I don't know when that started. I do know that, unfortunately, I think it was much more of an embarrassment for our country than it certainly was an embarrassment at the time, but now it's almost looked back upon as with a tongue-in-cheek kind of attitude. We had a president who committed adultery in the Oval Office. The thought was at the time, well, what he does in his private life, that's nobody's concern. Well, the problem is, it is our concern. He's a public servant, and the White House doesn't belong to him. It belongs to us. We're the taxpayers. That's a representative of our nation. And at the time, people just kind of brushed it off. Well, as long as the economy is good, I mean, who cares what he does? But it is a big deal. He committed adultery. Now, notice how Rabbi Yeshua in Matthew chapter 5 combines murder with how one treats one's neighbor. Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and following. He says, "You have heard that the ancients were told, 'You shall not commit murder. And whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. And whoever says to his brother, 'You good for nothing,' shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says, 'You fool,' shall be guilty enough to go into fiery hell." So he ties the two together as James does as well. Again, the punishment may be different, but it is still God's law, and it's been broken. So keep in mind, where James is going is this. How does someone live their life? How does someone live their life? When you see an individual, whether they claim to be a Christian or not, and especially if they claim to be, what kind of fruit do you see on their tree? Do you see fruits of righteousness? Notice I didn't say, do you see charitable acts? Anybody can do charitable acts. Anybody can donate blood to the Red Cross or give some clothes to Goodwill. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about fruits of righteousness. Their actions are bringing glory to their Father. John 13, verse 35, by this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. And we throw that word love around when oftentimes we shouldn't. Admiration, affection, that's not love. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. If. And as a believer matures, they will have more love for the brethren. It's just going to be natural. We're in the same family. Same Spirit, same Lord, same baptism, same Father. Verses 12 and 13. So speak, and so act as those who are to be judged by the law of liberty. For judgment will be merciless to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Really, truly, when you think about it, how can we show favoritism? How can we show partiality? When the amazing grace that we so talk about and that we sing about, that amazing grace, we did not earn it. We did not earn that amazing grace. And we certainly don't deserve it. So if that's the case, and we have amazing grace, and I'm thankful for that, how can I show favoritism or partiality? I have something that I don't deserve. He chose you. You did not choose him, and neither did I. You did not earn that salvation. You did not earn that grace. He adopted you. He didn't have to. He adopted me. He adopted me into his family. I did not earn that, nor do I deserve it. If that's the case, how in the world can we show partiality? And this is where James is going to go. So we put people up on a pedestal. Oh, especially if they're rich or if they're famous. Movie stars and entertainment and music and sports athletes and all of that. And oh my goodness, they're so rich and they're so famous. He's so handsome. She's so beautiful. Slow down. Who gave them their looks? Who was the one who made him so handsome? Who was the one who made her so beautiful? He's so successful. Well, who gave him the strength to do that? He's so intelligent. Well, who put the mind in his skull to be able to be intelligent? It all comes back to God. Why would we go ahead and put somebody up on a pedestal when what they have they don't deserve? Leviticus 19 verse 15. You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor nor defer to the great, but you are to judge your neighbor fairly. And God, keep in mind, is speaking to a redeemed people. And as far as Moses is telling the people out in the wilderness, hey, if you haven't forgotten, if not for God, you would still be in Egypt. If not for God, if not for Yeshua and the cross, we would all be lost. Tim Hegg writes, our communities of faith are to be characterized by a full acceptance of those who evidence a true faith in Yeshua and who desire to grow in that faith. This means that we must always be willing to come alongside of those in need and to encourage each other in our life of faith. When one is struggling in their faith, they need the support and care of other believers within their community, not to be shunned as unworthy. The local ecclesia is not a quote-unquote country club for the affluent segment of society, nor is it to be identified on the basis of ethnicity, end quote. Well put. Every community of faith, shul, church, it should look like everyone who's sitting around the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom. All different shapes, all different colors, different languages, different all of this. We're all been adopted into the family. Why is it? Truly ask yourself, why do we have practically all white churches? Why do we have all black churches? Why? Do you really think God is pleased with that? Do you really, really think that God is pleased with, let's say, a Spanish-only speaking church? Where, let's say, I wanted to go in there, and I don't speak Spanish, but I wanted to go, and I wanted to celebrate with my brothers and sisters, and I can't do it. Now, it's not because I don't want to learn Spanish, but the point is, we should all be able to celebrate and worship our God together. And when we can't, that's a problem. James says, so speak and so act. He's using terms which encompass one's entire life. We're either speaking or we're doing, right? All the time. We're either speaking or doing. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged, because inevitably we will all stand before the Lord and give an account. It is going to happen. Romans 14 verse 10. But you, why do you judge your brother? Or you again, why do you regard your brother with contempt? For we will all stand before the judgment seat of God. 2 Corinthians 5 verse 10. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may be recompensed for his deeds in the body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. And notice, that's the same author who wrote Romans and 2 Corinthians, Paul. And if Paul in one verse uses the term judgment, or the judgment seat of God, and in the other letter he says the judgment seat of Christ, he's using the terms interchangeably. Obviously for Paul, Yeshua is God. That's a no-brainer. What exactly will we be judged on? Well, our words, our deeds, as well as our attitudes. Our words will be judged. Matthew 12 verse 36. But I tell you that everyone will have to give an account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. Our deeds, Colossians 3, beginning of verse 22. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and you curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. For it is the Lord Messiah you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. We will be judged by our words, our actions, as well as our attitudes. Matthew 18, beginning verse 21. Then Peter came to Yeshua and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Yeshua answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. And in the parable of the unmerciful servant, verse 35 of the same chapter 18, he says, this is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you, unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. We will all have to give an account for every word we've said or didn't say, every action that we did or didn't do, the attitudes that we took towards people, our thoughts that we took towards people, everything. He's going to run the x-ray through, and he's recording everything. We will be judged as those who are judged. By what? By the law of liberty. By the law of liberty. When you obey the laws of a government, whether it be on the state level, the federal level, but let's say the state level, when you obey the laws of that government, it shows that you're a citizen of that government. Okay? We live in Palm Beach County, South Florida. We obey the laws of either your city, your state, right? Whether it be certain taxes, okay? I don't obey the laws of the state of Georgia because I don't live there. Now, if I cross the state line and I go into Georgia or Alabama or Mississippi, Louisiana, South Carolina, so on and so on, well, because I crossed onto that state land, I'm going to have to obey those laws. And I understand that. So I have 2 choices. I can either obey those laws because I'm now in the state of Georgia, or I can turn around and come back to Florida if I don't like it. That's the way things go. All right? So you walk into somebody's house and somebody says, take your shoes off. You have 2 options. If you want to stay, you take your shoes off. Or you can keep your shoes on, but you're going to be going out the door you came in. Why? Because it's my house. It's my house. I pay the bills. I pay the mortgage. My rules. You don't like it? There's the door. As long as we're here, and if you're under the auspices of a government, you obey the laws of that government. Who's our father? What kingdom do we belong to? Where is our citizenship? Our citizenship is in heaven. So we obey his laws. I do not abide by the laws of the state of Georgia because I don't live there. Likewise, when you obey the law of liberty, this is where James is going, it marks you as a true believer. Unbelievers don't obey the Torah. Not from the heart. Maybe the Orthodox might try to do their best, but their deeds are as filthy rags. But when you are obeying the law of liberty and you do it from the heart because you know that God is your Father, it marks you as a true believer. God's law of liberty will teach us how to run the race because we want his approval. Hebrews 12, beginning in verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and of course this is right after the Great Hall of Faith chapter, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Yeshua, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. James is telling us, for judgment will be merciless to one who has shown no mercy. Think of it this way. Whether it's ice skating or gymnastics, those sports that are judged. Okay. The judge is not going to award the gold medal to the one who came in last. I really feel sorry for that figure skater. She really tried her best, and I know that she came in 5th place, but we're going to give her the silver medal. That's showing partiality. Okay. Judgment will be merciless to one who has shown no mercy. Do not discriminate. We don't discriminate against the poor. We should not be discriminating against those who are weak in the faith. We're not to discriminate against those who are unlearned. Maybe we may even call them the popular term is babes in Christ. They just came to faith. They're still learning. They may have a ways to go. So you help them. You help train them. You show some patience. It's like a little one. Little ones are learning. Little ones are going to get into things. Little ones aren't going to listen the first time. And so you have to repeat it over. And you have to repeat it over and over. But we don't discriminate. Why would we discriminate against, like, let's say, I'm going to show partiality to somebody who's rich, when it's God who gave them the power to be rich? Everything goes back to him. And then he tells you this. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy triumphs over judgment. It is shocking to me and very disappointing when so many of our brothers and sisters, they look at, and I'm using air quotes here, the God of the Old Testament as some mean God. Oh, look at him and all the rigid statutes and the commandments. And what Bible are you reading? Because when I look at that Old Testament, which is honestly the Tanakh, the Scriptures, I see a merciful God. I see a loving God. Adam, on the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. And the woman took the fruit, and she ate of it, and she gave to her husband, and he ate of it. Were they struck dead on the spot? No. In fact, they did not die that day. Spiritually, you may say yes. Would God have been just if he had struck them dead on the spot? Yes. Because he told them, on the day you eat it, you will die. He showed them mercy. He showed them mercy. Cain slew Abel. Cain deserved the death penalty. He showed him mercy. David committed adultery and murder. God forgave him. Mercy over and over and over. It's mercy, it's mercy, it's mercy. And then Uzzah touched the ark when the oxen stumbled. And God struck him dead. Is God mean? No, he's just. That's judgment. So how often do you see God exhibit judgment, and how often do you see him exhibit mercy? Much more mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. The flood. Noah and his family got on the ark. Everyone else was destroyed. Everyone else received judgment. Noah and his family received mercy. It's not as if Noah deserved it. Noah is a sinner just like everybody else. But God showed him mercy. MacArthur writes, he says, the person whose life is characterized by mercy is ready for the day of judgment and will escape all the charges that strict justice might bring against him, because by showing mercy to others, he gives genuine evidence of having received God's mercy. God is merciful. And so James is saying a true believer is merciful as well. Is merciful as well. Verse 14, what use is it then, my brethren, if someone says he has faith, but he has no works? Can that faith save him? It's a rhetorical question. Look, what kind of love is it if I tell my wife that I love her and yet I never show it? Well, I make sure the bills are paid, and I make sure that she has clothes to wear, and I make sure she has a roof over her head, and she... Well, no, that's responsibility. I'm being a responsible husband. But am I being a loving husband? I love you. Well, what does that mean? Prove it. If you love me, you'll keep my commandments. Anybody can say, I love you. Yeah, prove it. What use is it, brethren, if someone says he has faith, but he has no works? Can that faith save him? A sinner that receives salvation will grow in the righteousness of that salvation. Again, a sinner that receives salvation will grow in the righteousness of that salvation. Tim Hegg writes, thus, someone who claims to have saving and redeeming faith, but whose life shows no evidence of progress in sanctification, such quote-unquote faith is not the saving faith described in the Scriptures, and is therefore worthless. What about those who truly think they're Christians, and even they profess an outward confession of it, but that confession is never accompanied by a life change that is evident? I'm a Christian. Prove it. And I'm not just saying by going to church or going to shul. Prove it. That's where James is going. Anybody can say they're a Christian. Well, I go to church every week. So? Look what James says. If someone says he has faith. Says he has faith. So the person does not have faith. They just claim to have it. If someone says he has faith. Matthew 7, beginning verse 22, many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Evildoers. I don't know who you are. Never knew you. Can that faith, save him? Obviously, the answer is no. What this person has in their own mind is simply religion. And it's a false religion. It is a false religion. And that's what James is saying. If someone says he has faith, there's no evidence of that faith whatsoever. There's no change. That person has been telling you they've been a Christian for the last 20 years. And guess what? For 20 years, you've seen no fruit. No progress. Like what Tim Hegg wrote. No progress in sanctification. No maturity. There's no desire for the Word. They're not learning the Word. They're not growing. They're not loving more and more. That person is not saved. Guzik writes, James did not contradict the Apostle Paul, who insisted that we are saved not of works, Ephesians 2:9. James merely clarifies for us the kind of faith that saves. We are saved by grace through faith, not by works. But saving faith will have works that accompany it. As a saying goes, faith alone saves, but the faith that saves is not alone. It has works with it. It has good works with it. Wiersbe writes, people with dead faith substitute words for deeds. They know the correct vocabulary for prayer and testimony and can even quote the right verses from the Bible, but their walk does not measure up to their talk. They think that their words are as good as their works, and they are wrong. Verses 15 and 16. If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and be filled, and yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, what use is that? Notice, if a brother or sister, so he is specifically talking about those who are in the same family. Names are written in the book of life. They're in the same family. By the way, the same family which you claim you say you're in, because you say you're a Christian. So you claim to be in the family of God. That's what you're saying. If a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, so the very necessities of life, the bare necessities, that person is in dire straits. Genesis 28 verses 20 and 21. Then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, the bare necessities, and I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. Because that's what he promises. Now, if that's your father, and that's what he promises, watch. And you say, go in peace, be warmed and be filled. Really? It's a total rejection of the one who is in need. 1 Timothy 6:8, if we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. Those are the bare necessities. God knows you need food to eat, water to drink, clothes to wear, and a roof over your head. You have to have these things to survive. And there is a brother or a sister that you claim is your brother and sister, and that person is truly in need, and you don't supply the need for them, then you're not in the same family. It's impossible. He says, what use is that? What use is that? What we don't understand, and unfortunately what the church has failed to teach, when someone truly, that dead spirit is quickened and regenerated, and there is a washing from the inside out, it's a work of the Holy Spirit, not of hands, but of the Spirit, and that Spirit takes up residence. It is like getting hit with lightning. Anybody that has been hit by a bolt of lightning and survived to talk about it, they will tell you they're not the same. You cannot be born again. John chapter 3. You cannot be born again and not be changed. And over time, you see the change in that person. There's more love, there's more giving, there's more caring, there's more of a desire for the word, there's more of a love for the brother. There has to be a progress of sanctification. There has to be. That's why we promote here in our congregation, Beth Shalom. People say, "Oh, it's a congregation." Man, it's a family. That's what we're promoting, is a family. We come together. We're a family. And if someone is in need, then we rally around and we meet the need, because we're a family. We don't shove the person off. Well, you're on your own. You're in the family. It is, I haven't gotten a phone call like this in quite some time. But it seemed like I would get a phone call like every 4 days. for a while there. And this person would call, and I'd say, and I introduce myself, and Besa Shalom, and they would say, oh, and this happened, and I have this disease, and it's in my spine, or I have this, and I'm going through a tough time, and I've been laid off from my job, and my house caught on fire, and my dog died, and my car won't start, and, I lost a tooth, and on and on and on and on. And this goes on for like 5 minutes, and I'll just sit there, and I just listen, and I listen, and I listen, and I listen, and finally they come to a period in the sentence. And inevitably, this is can you help me out? Can your church, can your synagogue help me out? And I don't say anything right off the bat, and I just say, excuse me, may I speak? Yes. Okay, good. What church do you go to? Or if they use the word synagogue, what synagogue do you go to? 99% of the time, well, I don't go to one. Oh, now I understand. So you could care less about the things of God. All this time, living your life, you wanted to do whatever you wanted to do. And now you've hit hard times, or whatever, and now you need a handout. If the handout would actually do something eternal for you, well, that would be great. I have a better idea. Let me give you the gospel. Guess what happens after I say that? Click. And it happens 99% of the time. We have to remember, we are in a family. Family members look out for one another. I love the Passover. We have been redeemed. We are no longer in Egypt. We're not in the promised land yet. We're not in glory yet. We're not in the kingdom yet. We're out in the wilderness. And we're all in this together. Someday we will make it to the promised land. We're just not there yet. Verse 17. Even so faith, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. Tim Hegg writes, all too often, people have come to the erroneous conclusion that quote-unquote membership in a quote-unquote religious group or movement is the sum and substance of being accepted by God and being granted eternal life. But faith that is dead is one's words unmatched by one's life. And this means that it is not faith, as God defines it, and is therefore useless. 1 John 5:12, he who has the Son has the life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have the life. So if we're driving down the street and you tell me, and I'm driving, you say, hey, pull on over to the road. And I pull off the side of the road and we walk outside the vehicle and say, hey, you see that orange tree? There's only one problem. I don't see any oranges on it. Well, I'll take your word for it initially because this is the first time I've seen the tree. But if I come back a month later and there's no oranges, and if I come back 3 months later and there's no oranges, how about 6 months later there's no oranges? A year later there's no oranges. In fact, when I come back, not only am I not seeing oranges, the leaves are actually turning brown, they're falling off, and it looks like the branches are getting brittle. I got bad news for you. Not only is that not an orange tree, it's a dead tree. You may have thought it was an orange tree. You were wrong. So when someone says they are a Christian, and you've never seen oranges, and they're not producing any oranges, and for the last 20, 25 years that they've been saying they were a Christian, you don't see any oranges, it's not an orange tree. 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore, if anyone's in Messiah, he is a new creature. The old things pass away, behold, new things have come. And so, unfortunately, folks, this message has got to get out there. We got way too many people, whether going to shul on a Shabbat or going to church on a Sunday, and all they are doing is warming the pews. They are not saved. They may think they are, and they're not. My final words. Wife comes home, and she says, honey, sit down with me, I have news for you. And he sits down on the couch, and she grabs him by the hand, and she's smiling, and she says, guess what? I have great news. What, honey? I got great news. I'm pregnant. And man, I mean, he's so happy, and man, he starts to tear up, and he takes her and he hugs her, and they're kissing like, oh man, this is wonderful, baby. And then 2 months pass, and she's not showing. And 4 months pass, and she's not showing. And 6 months pass, and there's nothing there. She's not pregnant. She may have said she was. If there's a life inside a woman and she's pregnant, that life is going to grow. The life will develop. That little one is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then start moving around. Start moving around. Those arms are going to move. Those legs are going to move. And by the time you get to 9 months, guess what? That little one wants out. There's life inside. You have to see fruit. And if you don't, if there's no evidences of life, then that person is spiritually dead. We're going to stop with verse 17. And when we get back together again, we'll pick it up with verse number 18.